Welcome back for the second portion of Joy in Our Town. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm your host, Tammy Jo Johnson. Our guest for this segment is Melissa Lindsay, staff attorney for the Family and Youth Law Center at Capital University Law School. She has joined us today to discuss the importance of youth justice, along with how we can support better responses for juvenile offenders. Thank you so much for being here with us again.
Thank you for having me.
So in this segment, we're going to talk about youth justice. But before we do that, how would you define youth justice? How would you define that word?
To me and to our work at the Family and Youth Law Center, I think it's all about working with kids at the point in their life when there's an opportunity to turn the tide, when there's an opportunity for youth to, to see, okay, I've made some mistakes and it's time to, to move forward, as opposed to what I think oftentimes is happening now, which is youth are making mistakes and then those mistakes are following them for the rest of their lives, and those are leading to bigger problems and worse situations for them, their families, and for their communities.
Right, and which in turn can have a large impact on the economy, really.
Absolutely.
And what kind of impact does incarceration have? And again, we're going to define incarceration as, youth incarceration as what?
To me, it's from the moment someone is arrested and placed in that detention center. So even if we're not talking about, youth prison, which in Ohio is our Department of Youth Services, the detention centers at the local levels, we know that there are adverse impacts on high school graduation rates and on other measures just from one day spent in a detention center. So we advocate strongly for youth to be kept in their homes and in their communities, and we understand, of course, that there's a juvenile court system and there are going to be cases, but in all but the worst cases, we want to see and we advocate for those youth to stay out of the detention centers.
Wow, that's amazing. And I don't know why, I thought the detention center don't they have school? I know the Department of Youth Services does, but does the detention level have schools where they can keep up?
They provide some educational services to the youth that are incarcerated there, but the reality is it is nothing compared to, being in that classroom setting in the community where kids belong.
Wow. How do you guys get in touch with, how are you connected with these youth that are having the issues as far as like the records or just getting back in school, trying to get that adjustment or transition? How do you?
We get referrals from a number of places. We work with the children's services agencies, and unfortunately, a lot of times the kids who are involved in child welfare will cross over to juvenile justice. So we have connections with those agencies. We have connections with the different community organizations that provide support to youth who have emancipated from foster care. And again, oftentimes this is the same group of kids in the foster care system and in juvenile justice. And then we also have connections with groups that work with youth as they're re-entering, including from DYS and the detention centers.
And so what I guess what the question is now is, how do you do that? When they come into your office or your center and they talk to you about whatever's going on, trying to transition back into the community after being incarcerated or missing so many days of school, do you partner them with other agencies, or do you guys take on that responsibility?
It just depends on their needs. Yes, we absolutely rely on other organizations for referrals, and we definitely recognize there are issues that other organizations are better equipped to handle. So we absolutely do that. I like to see our approach to direct representation as truly an individualized approach. Each kid who comes to us is a different person with different needs. Typically, we deal with sealing and expungements right off the bat. Another thing that we like to do right away is check credit, because we're finding that kids who are involved in child welfare, juvenile justice, and other state systems have their information in so many different places that unfortunately it gets into the wrong hands. And that's another huge barrier that folks face, is just the credit score and those issues. And a lot of times, especially when it's not your own debt, that's something that really needs to be dealt with. And then from there, we just kind of go through our checklist and see where we can help. We do our best to support youth going on to higher education and accessing the different resources that are available to them there as well.
And that's amazing that you guys offer that service, because there are a lot of juveniles that have gone through the system, whether it be for justice or whether it be in the foster care system. But now what's happening is that juveniles, even young as 14, they're being charged as adults. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the bind over is the term that's used for a young person who's then sent to adult court. I personally have pretty strong opinion on bind over. I don't feel that it's an appropriate way to handle youthful offenders. I think we know from brain research and other psychological research that kids are different. Kids are different than adults. Their brains have not developed to the point where that we can hold them accountable in the same way that we want to hold adults accountable for decision making. So I see it as a big problem. What's happening is these youth are sent to adult court and processed just as if they were an adult. Their age is irrelevant at that point. So when they're sentenced to the adult prison system. So you can imagine what might happen to a young person in an adult prison, and it's not a positive thing.
No, and I guess what surprises me is that the advocacy is so low, because you have juveniles that are committing crimes, but and I'm not saying that they have a reason or a good reason, but they're victims themselves a lot of the time. So the advocacy in that is so surprising to me that it's not being really looked into before the charge takes place. Do you have a professional opinion or personal opinion as to why that is?
Well, I think we sort of tend to swing back and forth on the pendulum with just sort of criminal justice generally. We go from real tough on crime as a society back to kind of understanding that, hey, you know what, these are still our people that we're talking about. And so I think we're in a point in time now with juvenile justice that brain research and the psychological research is really starting to enter the picture. We're certainly not there yet, but it's starting to come into play, and I hope to see that increase both within police departments and training of police officers on those issues and on the issues that oftentimes we're talking about low-income communities and what those residents are facing, both youthful residents and adults. And then I hope to see that transfer over into the court system, and I think we have some of that. There are some crossover youth-specific courts that have started to pop up around the state where it's a recognition on the part of the court and really everyone involved that, when we have kids who are involved in child welfare and they come to juvenile justice, that's probably a failure of the child welfare system and of all of us to address their needs. So again, I think the tide's changing, but we've got a lot of work to do still.
And something's changing, because I know, because I have a juvenile offense. I was a juvenile offender, and the Department of Youth Services had Scioto Juvenile Correctional Center, and it had thousands of girls in it. Between '91 and 2004. What happened? Because I know that it's not in existence anymore. So what have they done with all those youth offenders?
Well, DYS really should be commended. They've taken on the challenge of reducing population, of improving the facilities. Right now, I believe the DYS population is under 500 kids in the entire state. That's the result of a few different things, one of which being, and this is not a lawsuit in which myself or our center was involved with at all, but there was a large-scale lawsuit against DYS about 12 years ago, which is just now wrapping up. From what I understand, it should be wrapped up by the end of the year, but that, as some absolutely wonderful advocates for children have stepped up and said, we know what's going on in these institutions and we have to change it, and DYS has come to the table and done that. So I think that's a great thing, and we're seeing judges understanding that sentencing a youth to DYS is not their only option, and more often than not is not the best option.
And as someone who's been there, it's not a good place for a child at all, because now juvenile offenders eventually we turn into adults. And then we have children of our own, and so it's almost like that whole brain function, we understand that a lot more. And it's amazing to see that they're stepping up to the plate, because I know it doesn't exist anymore. You have something called the Youth Justice Project. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah,
so our Youth Justice Project was sort of a natural extension of our child welfare work, because again, we recognized that for a lot of folks, the foster care system doesn't serve them very well, and they end up in youth justice. We do a number of things under that. We work with the Franklin County Juvenile Court on restorative justice circles, which is a diversion program through the court, which is under our Youth Justice Project. We also work on community education. We held a community forum in April on youth justice issues, and that was an excellent event. We also work our FIAC, our direct service program, our Family and Youth Advocacy Advocacy Center is under our Youth Justice Project as well. We work on legislative issues, commenting on particular legislation as it impacts juveniles, and we also work with the Ohio Juvenile Justice Alliance. I'm a steering committee member of that group, and that's a group of child-focused advocates who work on all kinds of juvenile justice issues.
Which one are you involved in that advocates to end solitary confinement for the Ohio youth?
That's through the Ohio Juvenile Justice Alliance.
Okay.
We have partnered with the Children's Law Center, who has done just an absolute amazing amount of work on this issue on solitary confinement. From our website, there is a link to the Children's Law Center's page where they have a wealth of information on solitary confinement, and they also have a petition that we would strongly support folks signing. Where solitary confinement is, to me, one of the cruelest forms of punishment we have left in this country. We know that it has unbelievably detrimental effects on mental health in adults. So in a juvenile's developing brain, it's that much worse.
When you say solitary confinement, what do you mean?
So that's a kind of one of the problems with this issue is that the different settings call it different things and use it in different ways. I think to me, in the most basic level, it's isolation.
Right. Okay.
It's being placed alone.
And like you said, there are a lot of different collaborations that you're working with that are I mean, they're taking a step up, and that's a good thing. Before we end this segment, can you tell our viewers what are some of the key things that we can do as a community or as employers or as business owners when we have someone that comes into the presence of us that may have had a juvenile background?
To me, I mean, I think it's just so important to understand that kids are kids. And I think if as a society we could get back to that place where we understand that, behavior as a child, and quite frankly, the research is saying, your brain's not really developed till you're 29 or 30 years old. Right. But if we can really look at that and see that, hey, mistakes happen, particularly when you're a young person. And to me, what is so unfortunate is that when you're a young person, middle class, upper middle class, a lot of times you can make mistakes and that's okay. But when you're a lower income person, particularly a person of color or with a disability, that's not okay.
Right.
And it follows people for the rest of their lives. And so that's what I would just encourage everyone to remember is when you're looking at somebody who's had a juvenile adjudication, that person is not the same person who's standing before you.
Right. And along with you, what I like to tell parents is that, or like to tell people that come in contact with these adults who did commit youth crimes is that think about your child, because a lot of times parents and business owners, they're still parents, and they don't realize that at any given moment their own child could be in that situation. So it's almost kind of like, let's bring it back home,
Absolutely.
Wow. I really appreciate you joining us today. You've given us a lot of very good information that we can give our viewers and hopefully end these issues.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. That's our program. Thank you so much for watching. You can also check us out on Facebook at WSFJ-TV51. Join us again next week at the same time for Joy in Our Town.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and is made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town coming to your home every week. Write to Joy in Our Town, 7790 North Central Drive, Lewis Center, Ohio, 43035.